Hello everyone. So this is a short instructional video, if you will, and where I want to introduce what I call core conversational moves. And this draws from the work of people like Bill Torbert, most principally Bill Torbert. You could find more about it in his book Action Inquiry. But it also draws from the work of Chris Argyris and others who are really concerned with how groups and teams work together in order to create an environment of mutuality and collaboration. So I view these as really core conversational moves that we ourselves want to practice. It doesn't take much to learn how to do these, but to the degree that we practice these moves ourselves, the conversations and relationships and interactions we have with people tend to improve quite dramatically. And then these are also moves that we can teach teams and groups who are interested and committed to increasing mutuality and collaboration. So let's take a look at these. They're fairly simple and straightforward. So the first of these is framing. And framing really is about explicitly stating the purpose of the current moment. So the current moment could refer to this conversation, or it could refer to maybe a meeting, or it could refer to like maybe a workshop that you're leading, or maybe a whole cohort program. And that might be articulated in the form of here's the intention for this meeting, or here's the intention as I see it for this meeting, or here's the intention for this course. So we often speak of it as an intention or as a purpose, but it's a way of framing, which is to help people understand, what it is that we're about to move into. Advocating, which is explicitly stating a proposal, feeling, or an opinion about something. And I'll go into more depth with all of these in just a moment. The third is illustrating, which is providing evidence or somehow revealing the sense-making or the reasoning behind an advocacy that I'm making. And then finally, inquiring, which is to offer an explicit and authentic invitation to hear the perspectives of others on the advocacy that I've just made. So those are the four moves, and let's walk through each of these in turn. The first of these is framing, and again, it's explicitly stating the kind of like what it is that I'm about to do, to state the kind of the context or the frame of what it is that I'm about to do. So, for instance, it could be, I'm wanting to share something. It might be, say, with a friend. I'm wanting to share something with you that's really personal, and so I ask that you treat it maybe somewhat tenderly. So that might be one way of framing. Another way of framing might be, for instance, you're a consultant, and this is an example that came up in a conversation recently with someone in this cohort. You're a consultant, and you're about to facilitate an event, and you want to try something new, some new experimental move that you haven't done with this group, or maybe you haven't done at all, right? And by the way, as consultants, consider that we have the right to try new things with our clients. That's actually one of the things that we have a right to as a consultant, and it's something that Peter Block talks a lot about in his book Flawless Consulting. Anyways, with that aside, so you might frame it by saying something like, so I'm, in this next thing we're about to do, I want to try something new with you, and I actually haven't done it before, and I'm not exactly sure how it's going to go, and but I think it's going to be really useful for you. Are you willing to try this with me? Right. So by the way, you can see that I'm offering a little bit of an inquiry at the end of that framing, which we often do. So you can see now I've alerted them to what's happening, but I've also given myself a kind of permission explicitly to make this sort of move. So framing is as much for my benefit as it is for their benefit or the other person's benefit. So it's a way to help us be clear what it is that we are in the midst of, what it is we're in the middle of, what it is we're about to engage in. The second move, and so when it's missing, by the way, people often have to wonder what you're getting at, and uh, they have to try to guess like what's the point behind all of this, which creates confusion and ultimately misinterpretation and misunderstanding, and even maybe even some degree of resentment or distrust. Okay, so the second move is advocating, and advocating simply is just explicitly stating an observation, an opinion, maybe an option, a perception. It could be expressing a feeling, even one of anger, disappointment, elation. So I notice I'm feeling, with what's going on right now. I notice I'm feeling a bit triggered, and here's the nature of my trigger. Uh, so it's in order to let people know where you're at. And when advocacy is missing, people don't know where you stand, and they ultimately they lose, and you lose the potential benefit of your contribution. Now, something that I sometimes see, particularly with some agile coaches, is they tend to be in this inquiry mode, and we'll get to inquiry in just a moment. And yeah, asking lots of questions, and somehow we often misconstrue training from the professional coaching world as we just do nothing but ask questions. And as coaches, we're also mentors, we're also teachers, and people want to know where we stand, how we see things. They want to benefit from our potentially wise counsel. And so to the degree that we withhold advocacy, it also creates a kind of mistrust, like people aren't quite sure where you stand. So that's the second move, advocating. The third move is illustrating. So, which is really ultimately to provide a concrete example, or maybe clarifying the intent of an advocacy. So, so if you combine an advocacy with with illustrating, an example might be. So this might say be with the team that you're working with. So I noticed that. Uh, that there was the promise of delivering something in the last sprint, and that didn't get delivered, and this is something that's happened a couple of times over the current release period, and and I'm concerned that that this will start to foster distrust with our product management colleagues, and you may not see that. But I've had a couple of conversations with them, and they're pretty good with how things are going. But they're starting to feel a little bit concerned and worried, not knowing, if and when things that we have agreed to will actually get delivered. So there's an impact there. So you can see that I made an advocacy and I gave some illustration. Now, the other thing about illustrating is that it ultimately reveals your own sense making and behind your advocacy. So, for instance, with that example, having given that illustration, people might question what happened. In that case, it might be hard to do that. But for instance, suppose that I were to advocate that that we move. Maybe we simplify, the way that we are coding things. That the code has become really quite complex, right? So I might be a senior software developer on a team, and I might be advocating for more simplicity in our code. And an illustration might be, I might pull up maybe an example or two of, just little bits of code and show where I believe it's overly complex. Now, in doing that, I've revealed my own sense making, what overly complex looks like for me. And what that does is it offers others the opportunity to question my assumptions, to call out maybe my assumptions, or to question them in some way. So the illustrating part helps us have a collaborative conversation. If I simply advocate without illustrating, it leaves people feeling a little bit defensive, or maybe even at a loss, like they're not quite sure how to interact with me. And that can be particularly pernicious or unhealthy if I have a certain kind of leadership role, or if I have a certain kind of power in the group, maybe I am the senior most software developer, and so people are left to just say, okay, Michael said this, so it must be true, but I'm not so sure. And so there's a little bit of mistrust that's generated when I do fail to illustrate. And then the final move is inquiring, and which is to genuinely hear another perspective. So to go back to that last example, it's a little geeky for us. I used to be a software developer for many years, so so I've been looking a lot at the code base, and it seems, it's very elegant and very beautiful, but it seems also very complex, and I'm worried that it might be hard to maintain, or it might be hard for new software developers to come in and work with it. And let me show you, a couple of examples of what I'm meaning. So advocacy, illustrating, and after having said all that, then I would ask the question in the spirit of inquiry. So how do others see it? So it's an explicit invitation for people to engage with me in the conversation, and maybe even kind of disagree with me in an informed way, or not an informed way. But again, just as illustrating helps to further the potential for conversational dialogue, so does inquiry. And oftentimes some of you may have seen this, the notion of balancing advocacy and inquiry. And so that whenever we say something, whenever we offer an observation, or articulating what's going on, or what I make up, we always want to follow that up with, how do others see it, or how do you see it, or do you see it differently, or what do you think? But it has to come from a genuine place. If what you're up to is trying to manipulate the other person, that offer of inquiry may come across as somewhat disingenuous. So so when it's missing, other people tend to withdraw, and especially, again, if you have a place of power in relation to this other person or in this situation, they may really withdraw, but something gets kind of broken a little bit in the relationship, and there's a mistrust. So you're no longer really related anymore. Okay, so you can think of these 4 moves as a kind of dance, so we're often framing and advocating and illustrating and inquiring and framing, and how do you see it, and well, I want to offer this, I want to say something in this moment, but I'm not sure how it's going to land. And so so here goes. So even just that little bit of, I'm not sure how it's going to land, is a form of framing. So this is a conversational dance that we can practice, that we can develop. And one way that you can initiate the practice of this is maybe to get with somebody else in the cohort and practice it. And one way you can practice it is that, for instance, imagine, so here's the practice. So the 2 of you together, and this might be something that you practice, 10 minutes each way. So 20 minutes is all it takes. So so there may be a dicey conversation that's coming up. So imagine a dicey conversation that's coming up, or maybe a conversation that you need to have with a client, or maybe with a team, and so you want to literally, maybe even just write down, these 4 pieces, what you might say in terms of framing, what you might say in advocating and illustrating. You might want to write it down, and then practice saying this with this other person, and then that other person gives you feedback as to how it lands, and you might practice it 1 or 2 more times. Now, doing it this way may feel a little artificial at first, but it's the way to kind of start to embed this practice into your ordinary daily sort of conversational practice. And it actually doesn't take that long, and it's not that hard to do this. Once you do it a few times, it starts to get into your bones. It starts to kind of almost create new neural connections, which I often say. So I'm inviting you to really practice this, and to the degree that you can practice this, to the degree that you integrate it into your own sort of daily conversational practice, you can start to introduce these practices to the teams and groups that you work with. Very, very powerful for teams and groups to have this conversational pattern language available to them. It's relatively simple to understand. It's relatively simple to do, and people see the beneficial effects of this fairly quickly. Okay, that's it for that. Thank you.